Welcome to my YouTube channel, Surowicz Watercolor. You can subscribe to my channel by clicking the icon in the lower right hand corner at any point during this video. This is the narrated step-by-step tutorial for my painting, First Light. The photograph on the right was a reference and inspiration for my painting, First Light. I wanted to capture the atmosphere created when the sun comes up over the horizon and starts to break in the early morning, and I like the interesting shadows and some of the silhouettes that are created by that. Before I begin, I'll go through the colors that were used in the painting. Cerulean blue, cobalt blue, royal blue, satin green, Hansa yellow, gamboge, quinacridone gold, quinacridone burnt orange, raw umber, rose madder quinacridone, and alizarin crimson quinacridone. I've drawn my sketch with a B pencil on my watercolor paper. I'm working on a quarter sheet of 140-pound cold press watercolor paper. That's 11 inches by 15 inches. I have my paper mounted to a board with masking tape, and my board is resting at about a 20-degree angle. So when I put a wash on it, it's going to be affected by gravity. And I'm going to begin with my painting turned so that it's slanted sideways, because that's how I want to apply the sky wash. And you'll see as I begin why I'm doing that. Often I begin my paintings working wet on dry. However, in this particular painting, I'm going to start with a wash working wet and wet. So I'm going to begin by applying clear water over the entire surface of the paper. So I'm just using a short-handled 1-inch brush, and I'm just applying clear water all the way down the page. As I said, I had a particular reason for wanting to turn this sideways, because the sunrise is going to come up over that horizon, and it's a horizontal line, and it's going to be lighter on the horizon line behind the building structures and the trees, and it's going to start to get move towards a blue as it gets higher in the sky. So I'm going to put this wash on and let it flow down. In this case it's vertical, but because I have this turned sideways, it's going to go in the direction of the horizon line. I've started to put down a wash of gamboge with some quinacridone burnt orange in it. And the page itself is saturated, so the color diffuses nicely, and you can see gravity is starting to pull it down the page. And I don't worry about painting over some of the structures and some of these areas, because later on, as I build up my shapes and values, I'm going to paint over some of these, and I want to have this color to carry throughout the composition. And on the left side there'll be sun breaking and coming in front of that barn, so I want to put in some of that color now. And now on the right hand side I've started to introduce cerulean blue. So it's just pure cerulean blue. So at this point I've used cerulean blue, gamboge, and quinacridone burnt orange. And I'm putting some of that blue at the bottom, and I'm working it up because I don't want to have a lot of orange into that. I want that blue to be a little stronger, so I'm going to introduce some more of that cerulean blue wash in the bottom right and work it up. I'm applying this wash with a 1-inch flat brush. I want to maintain a nice clean roof line as it's silhouetted against the sky. So to do that, I've put some rice tape on the edges of the first area of the roof, which I'm going to paint. So this rice tape will seal the paper nicely, but it won't damage the paper. So it's pretty easy to work with. Here I'm taking a wash, a fairly dark valued wash. This is sap green and cerulean blue. I'll take a little bit more cerulean blue in my mixture, but it's pretty dark value. Now I'm going to dry this, and I'm going to remove the tape off the bottom edges. So it removes very easily. Sometimes I'll just take the tip of a knife and just lift it up. And I'm going to leave the pieces on the top up there for now. But you can see what a nice clean edge it left. I'm going to put a wash on the side of the structure. I'm working with a 1/2-inch flat brush. I'm using a combination of cerulean blue, quinacridone burnt orange, a little bit of royal blue, and some rose madder quinacridone also. It's about a middle value. Insert the reference photo in the top right corner, and you can get a feeling for the silhouetting of the structure. So a lot of that building, of all the buildings, is in a middle value for the most part. Some areas a lighter, warmer middle value, other areas a cooler, a little bit darker middle value. So right now I'm just going to cut this wash around this other little building here and just bring it down to where it touches the ground. And you can see that it didn't matter that I put that wash over the whole page. Later on, as this painting evolves, that's going to help bring some unity to the composition, and there'll be little pieces of this color that are going to show throughout the whole composition as this painting develops. Next, I'm going to paint the silo structures, and I have a piece of tape on the left edge. Again, I want to have a nice clean edge on some of these areas that are silhouetted. And I'm using a much warmer wash now. You can see, if you look at the reference photo, how that bright light is coming along the side of those silos, and it really warms it up. I'm using quinacridone burnt orange with a little bit of royal blue in the mixture to help cool it down a little bit and neutralize it, so it's not just one flat tone. And I'm going to just bring a little of that color forward here, and I'll soften this edge. It's not going to be as pronounced, but it's going to carry that color down a little bit into that other area. I'm going to drag it down with a few brush strokes here, and I'm not going to leave those hard edges there. I'm going to take this spray bottle with a fine mist spray. I'm just going to kind of drag that color and push that color diagonally so it starts to pick up the feeling of some the sun, morning sun starting to break the horizon and come around the structure. This is something that I like to use this fine mist spray with when I'm trying to create some soft edges and trying to create direction. I find it's an effective technique to do something like this, and then I'll blot it with tissue and come back with a spray, and just it's very wet right now, so I can work with it. Once it starts to set an edge, then I start to get limitations on what I can do. Here I'm going to take a 1-inch flat brush, just a damp brush, damp with water, and I'm just going to lift a little bit more of that color to make those kind of sunbeams coming across a little stronger. Now I'm going to go back to my 1/2-inch flat brush. I'm going to take some of this mixture that I used on the silo. I'm going to strengthen that diagonal a little, but I'm just going to go right in and put a wash on this smaller building structure. I have a piece of tape there I need to get out of my way. I'm going to bring that wash across. So that mixture again is some quinacridone and burnt orange with a little bit of royal blue mixed in. And I'm gonna take that wash on this other side a little bit. And I'm just gonna bring it down and take some water here. I'm going to bring this same mixture down into the shadowed areas. And take it across. It doesn't matter that it's the ground and the building and the roof. I'm painting it all as a shape. I'm not looking at it as individual objects so much right now. I'm just looking at more as a shape of value. I want this edge to be a little bit more irregular here. So I'll just touch it with a flat brush. I'm going to put that reference photo back in the top right corner. I'm going to start to put a wash on this other building. And this is a mixture of cobalt blue with a little rose madder quinacridone. So what I have is essentially a blue and a blue violet and also a little violet, red violet. And just mix that up a little bit, but if you look at the photo, it's hard to see in the top right, but that building just has kind of a blue violet cast to it with that morning light the way it is and it being in shadow there. So I'm going to play that up a little bit with my wash, and it's going to dry to a light middle value, but it has that nice kind of a violet, blue violet tone to it. And as the painting develops, I'm going to put a few textures and some washes over that, and there'll be some shadowed areas. And I'm going to take that also right up into the roof. I'm going to put that reference photo back up in the left-hand corner. And I'm going to start to work on these trees that are here on the right side of the composition. There's one in between the small building and the back barn, and then there's another one behind the back barn. I'm using very dark values right now. I'm using some warm and cool mixtures. The warm mixture is a little bit of raw umber with some quinacridone burnt orange and some alizarin crimson quinacridone. And then the cooler mixture is some raw umber with a little bit of royal blue in it, and some royal blue with some quinacridone orange in it, quinacridone burnt orange, and just mixing those colors as I apply them. It's hard to see because it's such a dark value, but there's a little bit of warm and cool going on in this shape. I'm using a quill brush to apply this, so I'm working pretty much a negative space around this smaller building, and then overlapping the barn that's behind it, the one with the violet shape that I had painted. And I'm just trying to suggest some leaves coming off that shape. It's a pretty solid shape, that one that I'm doing right now, and the one behind that will have a little bit of light coming through it. But this one is pretty much totally in shadow and is just a nice dark shape. But I want to give the suggestion that some of those branches are sticking out a little bit. And now I've loaded my brush with a warm mixture of this dark value, and it's actually got quite a bit of quinacridone burnt orange in it. And I'm going to just let that dark value go right down into the rooftop here. So I'm painting this as one shape, even though there's some variation in the actual color that I'm using. But the value is the same going from the tree right into the roof line. So I'm letting those edges just get lost. I'm going to move back to this tree that's behind this other barn, and I'm trying to drag my brush in a few different directions here because I want some of that light to be breaking through this tree, so we feel like we're seeing through the tree to the sky that's behind this, so it's backlit a little bit. And it's hard to tell on this video, but I'm using some cooler mixtures, a little bit more blue in it to the right side, and then on the left it's just a little bit warmer. It has more burnt orange in it because I want it to start to feel the warmth of the sun on that left hand side. So I was dragging my brush on the side and pushing a little bit just to get some of that texture. Now I'm just going to take load it up and just be a little bit more precise with a tip and shape those the way I really want those spaces to look. And that tree is going to come all the way down to the top of this other shape here where it's some shrubs or a little bit of a hill in the contour of the land, and it's going to just come all the way down there and create an edge. And I'm going to come in, I'm going to add a little bit of detail to this building here in the back. So I'm just going to be working with a variety of warm and cool washes, mostly with some royal blue, quinacridone burnt orange. I'll use a little bit of violet here and there. But I'm starting to put some darker values on here, but kind of still in the middle value range. And I'm also going to have some of these mixes that I'll put on will be leaning towards the warm side a little bit, because I want to have some of that contrast of warm and cool going on even in this kind of a violet tone building. So here, just putting some of these shadows in where it's underneath the overhang or edge of a board, and then just gradate it down with water. The top of this building is going to be a little darker value, so I'm going to take some of the mixture that's leaning a little bit towards a dark violet. I'm going to put it over top of the roof of this structure. And I'm going to leave that little break of light there, just helps provide a little bit more interest to that shape rather than just paint it all the way solid. Here I'm just putting some little bit of value underneath the edge of the roof of this other building. Now I'm going to be moving around the composition as I start to add some more detail to the various elements and start to indicate where some of the shadows may be. Here I'm going to put a darker value underneath the overhang of the roof on this end of the building. And I'm going to soften that with some water and try and gradate that down a little bit. So when I try to soften the edges, I'll use water with my brush, and I'll blot it with a tissue, and sometimes I'll use a fine mist spray. Now I want this shape here is going to be much darker in value. So I'm going to come in, I'm going to paint this, and it's going to have a a little bit of royal blue with some alizarin crimson. I'm going to put a little sap green in it, and I'm going to put some quinacridone and burnt orange. So it's going to have, within this very dark valued shape, it's going to have some gradation of color from warm to cool to provide interest to that wash and to that shape. So it's not just a flat, dark valued shape. It's got some more interest in it with some of the color variation. I'm going to take some quinacridone and burnt orange and just really hit the top right there. And it just gives kind of the feeling that there's some of that warm light is just starting to get into to that area, or it's reflected light off something. But I like to have the warm and the cool throughout the composition. I try to avoid just flat washes, although sometimes they're appropriate. Here I'm going to put some shadow on the side of the building, which is catching some of that morning light. And again, I'm going to soften that and let it gradate down the side of the building there. Because I'm working transparently and I won't be using any opaque paint in this painting, I have to make sure that I plan for where my lights are going to be. And that's why I follow the process I do here. Sometimes I'll mask areas to preserve them, but I'm in this instance with this painting, I'm just using direct painting. I'm not using any masking or frisket. But it's important that I know where I want those lights to be at the start of my process, so that I can plan my painting process. I'm building a series of layers here. I started with the light values over the whole page with that sky wash, and then I've started to block in shapes and starting to now put in some detail. But on the left side of that, the larger barn there to the left by the silos, I had to plan to keep that light there, and then put some shadow on it afterwards. But you have to think and plan in advance. And that's why I always suggest, if that's something you struggle with, that working in your sketchbook is a good idea, doing thumbnail sketches and value studies, so you can plan that ahead. I'm going to paint the part of the roof that's overhanging the edge of this building. So I've put some more rice tape on that top edge so I can keep a nice clean edge. It's important to me on this, just because the way the silhouettes are, that I want to have a nice clean edge on the silhouette of this building structure. And this is the best way for me to do it, rather than try and do it freehand and have a little bit of irregularity. I just want to have a nice crisp edge. So that this rice tape is a good way to achieve that. Now I'm bringing in a little bit of that blue-violet tone that I used on that right building, and I'm putting over top of the wash that I had put down prior, because I want to pick some of that color up and carry it into this building. And as I do this, my brush strokes are vertical, because the characteristics of this barn has all these vertical boards on it. So you can use your brush stroke here, and the direction of your brush stroke, to help suggest the boards and the panels on the side of this barn. And here I'm going to take a scraping tool, and I'm going to just pull that wash that I put down just to help give the sense of that verticality in the boards and the panels that make up that wall of that building. I want to put a little bit more personality in the side of this building. So I'm coming in with some washes of a warmer mixture that has a strong influence of quinacridone and burnt orange in it. And I'm putting some of these brush marks horizontally to indicate the bottom of a line of boards. But then I'm going to take my fine mist spray and I'm going to spray it down vertically, again, to give the the feeling of those vertical panels, and just kind of contour that side of the building. And I'm going to do a little bit of brushwork with it also. But here now you have the warm playing against the cool, and there's this flowing vertical wash here that helps strengthen that feeling of the vertical structure of that building. Put that photo in the top right corner again, and now I want to work a little bit on this area here where I have the beams of light coming through as that sun is coming up, and I'm going to experiment with this just a little bit. I want to have the feeling of that light, but it's going to be softer. It can't be as hard edged, so I'll soften this up. But the challenge here is that I want to start to work in some of those green tones to suggest where the ground is. It's grass covered there. There's some dark areas, a little bit of brighter green in some areas, but I still want to maintain the feeling that these beams of light are kind of coming over the horizon here, and you can see them. So just take a little burnt orange there and strengthening that, and I took my fine mist spray and softened those edges a little bit. Now I'm going to start to introduce some of my green tones into the picture. So these are variations of a mixture of royal blue, quinacridone burnt orange, and sap green. And I want to try and work some of this green into the area here where we have these beams of light. And there's a horizontal direction to the pattern of this grass, the way it's going across the composition. So I want to try and give that feeling, that direction of some horizontal structure to this, the grass and how it contours the land. But at the same time, I want to still maintain the feeling of those beams of light coming through. So it's a bit of a challenge. So I'm going to take my fine mist spray and I'm going to try and bring those light areas of light value diagonally across the green paint that I've put down, and I'll lose some of that horizontal feeling, but there's just enough there to suggest that's a kind of a flat land there, and that grass is contouring it. And as I get up here to the right near this building, up near the bushes and this hill, it's a very dark value. So now I'm bringing in this very dark value green, and I'm going to transition it down to the what I just put down here with the light and everything, and going to give a little bit of a feeling of that grass that's following up there. I want to get a little darker and a bit cooler, so I'm going to come back in with a darker, cooler mixture right into some of what I've already put down. And that value carries from the right side of that building to those bushes, and just comes right down into this foreground area of this grass. But in the end here, this is going to have a middle value dominance in the foreground, and it's going to have a dark value dominance in the middle ground, and a light value dominance in the background. And that helps establish some of the spatial relationships in the composition. So I'm trying to work some of that green up towards the building there. But I'm going to lose a little bit of that because I'm going to come back here and I'm going to spray this again to try and restore a little bit more of that feeling of the light coming through. I'm going to get my 1-inch flat brush that has just clear water in it. It's just damp, so it's going to lift some paint off and just reinforce the feeling of those beams of light coming through. And I'm just going to clean up my border a little bit. Here again, I'm going to add a little bit of a horizontal brush strokes in here just to help contour the ground. Now I'm going to start to put some detail on the building. I'll start to paint some of the small dark value shapes. There are the windows and edges of boards and space between planks. I'll be using a number 4 round brush to do this. And I'm just using some of the dark value mixtures that I was using earlier. Combinations of royal blue, quinacridone burnt orange, some raw umber. I worry less about which individual color it is and think a little bit more about value and temperature of the color, warm and cool. There's an edge that's created here by where one row of planks ends and another one begins, and then there's some gaps in between a few of the boards. So this is when I'll use some of this dark valued brushwork to indicate some of those features, and I'll start painting in some of these windows that are in this barn. When I paint these types of features, I try not to make them just little squares and rectangles, but make the shapes a bit more interesting. While I'm using a very dark value here to put in these details, the contrast isn't as strong as it can be because the area that I'm applying these to is a middle value instead of a light value or the white of the paper. So the contrast is more subtle than if I were placing this to beside some of the lightest lights. It takes a while to work your way around the composition and put in some of these details, but it's just a continuation of the planning and layering process that I'm going through to accomplish this painting. When you think about the side of this building that I'm painting right now, I didn't set out to paint it by first painting a window and then painting boards in the side of the barn around it. It began with a layering process of larger shapes, and if you think about this particular side of the building, it first had a layer which had some of that initial sky wash go over top of it, and then I started to further define the side of the building by putting a larger wash on that was the shape of that side of the building. Then I started to add some shadows and some warm washes. And then I started to come in and do some of the smaller brushwork on top of these layers that have built up. So it's 2 different ways to go after this. The first one where I was mentioning where you just start by painting each object, paint the window, paint a board, I kind of call that a paint by number process, but I choose to take more of a layering approach where I start with these big washes, big shapes, and I just narrow my shapes, start getting harder edges and more detail. I'm going to put the reference photo back in the top left hand corner. Here I'm painting where some of these vines are growing on this barn. This is something I was trying to decide if I was going to put on or leave off, but I think I'm just going to put them on there, and it carries somewhat the feeling of the shapes that the trees create over there. It moves it through the composition a little bit, and you can feel that kind of organic vegetation across the composition, and it's not so isolated to those 2 trees on the right. And I'll bring some more of that around the left hand side. However, I wanted it to be soft edge, so I came back in and I sprayed that with the fine mist spray. And now I'm going to put some of this detail on the smaller building, the area that's getting a little bit of the light. So these are some smaller dark valued shapes, and I'm also going to put some of this value underneath the roof and gradate it down and let that just run a little bit. So there I put the paint. Now I'm going to take some clear water and just soften the edges and bring that down, let it gradate. I'm actually going to bring that value down over the face of that building a little bit more. Even though it's picking up the light, there's still areas that are cast in shadow. So I have a little variation there. And then I'm going to bring that down to some ground cover there. I'll break that edge up a little bit, make it a little more irregular. But it just takes that value, that shape from the building right down into the ground cover. Now I'm going to move around the side of the building and do some similar brushwork. So I'm going to paint this window, and I'll get some of this value underneath the overhang of the roof, and I'll gradate that wash down the side of this building, putting it a little bit more in shadow. So now you can start to see that this side of the building is in a bit more of a shaded situation as compared to the front of that building. Now I'm going to do some of the same brushwork on the side of the barn that's receiving the most light. So I'll be painting some dark shapes here. There's actually a board that's leaning against the building, and there's an open door behind that. So it's a dark valued shape with a board that has a corner overhanging that doorway. The board casts a dark shadow against the wall there. The dark values being placed on this side where the windows and doors are have a stronger contrast than those on the sides of the buildings because they're being placed on a lighter value. And there's very strong contrast between the trees and the sky and the roof line and the sky because of the juxtapositioning of those very dark values against the very light valued and subtle sky. Another area where there's some contrast that's subtle, and they're small marks but they're effective, is if you look in the bottom right hand corner. When I put in that dark green value, there's a few areas that as I was dragging my brush got skipped over, and I left those because it brings that light value into that area. And the same if you move straight above that to the right of the small building where there's some tall shrubs and a little hill there. There's a couple light values that are also the result of just a few brush marks leaving some plain paper or lightly glazed paper from the initial sky wash. And so it reads as a nice light value, and you can see a few touches of that, and those light values, those small marks, carry up into the tree on the right where you can see through the sky. So those little touches of light value help move you around the composition and help balance the values, so that those little touches of the light paper in the bottom right help bring a little harmony and balance to the composition, as opposed to it just being solid dark green. My paper is thoroughly dry, and I want to try and strengthen the feeling of that light coming across. So I'm going to take my fine mist spray bottle. I'm going to get very close to the paper, and I'm just going to try and lighten that diagonal ray of light that's coming across. and it's wet, I'm going to take my 1-inch flat brush that's damp, and I'm going to cut into that a little bit just to strengthen that and give it a little bit of a sharper edge. It's not real sharp, but that just gives a little bit more of a highlight on that diagonal beam of light. Now I'm going to put a white mat on to get rid of the tape and the board and get a good look at the artwork. That's my painting, First Light. If you want to see more of my videos or find out more information, you can select the link in the top right corner and choose one of the boxes to subscribe to my channel or join my mailing list. You'll also find the links in the description of this video. I hope you enjoyed this. Thanks for watching.